to school. We believe that homes, computers, and home learning are another critical element of equity and believe that that must be included in any transformation of technology and learning in the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lucky.
Thank you. It's just an honor to come before you and talk about a very important issue, which is really a base for the economic growth and health of this nation. We've heard some speakers in the past talk about the future, and I'd like to share my views on that. One of the things that I think we're seeing is that there is a recognition that there's a significant change in the society at whole, that indeed we're looking at a global telecommunications network that links the world. We're looking at a global economy. We're looking at alliances that are very different, and we see that in everything from the changes in the industry, like IBM, et cetera. And we see an empowerment of the individual, where people really do have that empowerment, whether you see it in talk radio or you see it on people who are actually on the net interacting in ways that have never been possible before. True empowerment of the individual. And what that means for education is that we need a very different kind of system and very different goals, if you will, in the system. And that's kind of what we're working through, that transition at this point in time. So what does that system look like? One is that it has to be very student-centered. The whole idea that for so long our system has been very adult-oriented, and it's time for us to get away from that and focus on the individual children that we're dealing with. And that means that we connect kids with community, that when we have learning activities, that they're real activities that impact real people. Let me give you an example from the state that I've recently moved from, Washington State. We decided that the way that social studies teachers were teaching state government was not doing a very good job. It's a very dry, boring subject in most schools. So what we did was we connected classrooms with state legislators across internet. We connected kids to electronic access to bill updates on a daily basis during session. We had hearings such as this across interactive video conferencing, where kids across the state could study that, could poll their communities and get impact. They influenced public policy. It was real, and that's the kind of activity that we're really looking for. We feel like the multi-age approach is good. We think the empowerment of the individual to live anywhere will make a real difference. Right now we have 11 million people in the United States who are telecommuting. That's a tremendous number, and it's growing. That means people can pick up their computers and fax modems and phones and go literally anywhere in the country. This could be an opportunity for economic development in our rural and remote areas, and our education system has to be up to that. We need affordable access for citizens and for students. And we not only need the access, but we also need for those people to have the knowledge and understanding to be able to use that access. Because it's one thing to get access to information, it's quite another to turn it into knowledge and understanding and wisdom. We need the telecommunications infrastructure everywhere. We have an opportunity right now with the telecommunications regulatory issues that are before you and the rewrite of the Communications Act of 1934. It really is an opportunity for us to take a look at what's going on and make sure that education and health facilities and libraries have access, affordable access. This is a window of opportunity. We are building the base for economic viability for many of those companies for years to come, and it's time to look at some trade-offs to make sure that they help us build that base. We need extensive training, and we need education as we go through this whole issue. We need seamless digital libraries, so kids really do have access to primary source data. So instead of just looking at things and saying, oh, this is somebody's interpretation, these children and these youth can go directly to the source, to source information, and be able to analyze, hypothesize, synthesize, and then turn that back so that the World Wide Web is indeed a way that they can publish for the world. An example of what we're trying to do in Illinois is we are connecting with museums where children across the state of of Illinois will actually work with the museums in Chicago and other areas to digitize imagery, do research behind the artifacts, and put a kid spin to those artifacts and put them on the World Wide Web and make those artifacts available to everybody in the world. It's a powerful kind of approach, and kids really are engaged in doing this. That's what we're doing, is we're turning those kids on, getting that glazed look off their faces, and I think it's a real critical one, and one that we need to continue. This means that we have new roles for students and new roles for teachers. For so long, someone told a joke the other day that said that if aliens came down and looked at the system in many classrooms today, what they would say is it's a place where little people come to watch big people work. And I think we need to change that. We have a system where we can empower these children to be a part of the system, where we can engage them in real projects, and we really need to go forth with that whole issue. I do have some recommendations for you. One is that our public does not understand this issue. We need a public awareness campaign so that visibility comes up, because frankly what we're seeing in a lot of places is that support and dollars follow vision. Let me give you an example. One of the communities I've been working with is a little community called Onalaska in southwest Washington, a logging community. They are very economically depressed. Many of those people are out of jobs, and yet that system has fiber access to every building. Every child and every youth has an internet access account. Parents can if they want. All teachers are using technology very effectively. When you ask the superintendent, how did this happen in this community that's so economically depressed, his response is that these people understand firsthand what it is not to have 21st century skills, and they don't want that to happen to their children, so they're willing to put their dollars into making that. And I think a theme that's happened throughout today is that we can't do this alone. It has to be through communities, through a cooperative venture. And I think all of our communities are up to it. I think the challenge grant that went out from the U.S. Department of Ed was exemplary in this form. They insisted that partnerships happen and that applicants could not apply unless they had a variety of partners in this. And I think that's a real positive move, and I would encourage Congress to continue with that. Got a lot of disparate kinds of grant opportunities that you could bring together so that communities can really look at this from a comprehensive point of view, that they're not only building the infrastructure, but they're also moving in directions where we have a trained and sustainable workforce to bring this about. We need flexibility. I really, frankly, was appalled at some of the things that the first panel members said about the current education system. I believe in many of the things that they talked about, that we need student-centered approaches, we need kids who are engaged, but I think we can do that from within this system. And frankly, if you look around the nation, you will see extraordinary things happen within the existing system. And what we need to do is to make sure that people such as yourselves go back into your particular communities, find those pioneers and honor them because they deserve it, and use them as models to move forward and provide the flexibility for those school systems so we can really do that in a variety of places. My personal understanding of how change happens is that it doesn't happen through mandates. It happens through incentives. It happens through system building and system capacity building, and it happens by empowering individuals. If you go into a school building and instead of just saying thou shalt, that you actually bring them together in a systemic strategic planning process so that we're all moving towards the same vision. You give them the facilities and resources to do that, and you do the staff development in new ways. So instead of saying you're going to travel over here to the next county and on Friday night and Saturday and learn some new things that have nothing to do with your kids, what you should be doing is bringing that staff development into that school that is very appropriate for their kids, their curriculum, their instruction, their machines, their software and hardware. And if you do that, then you've got something that's involving children as they go along. So they see the impact of what they're trying to do, and they're acting with kids. The last one that I'd like to talk about is infrastructure, and I think that's a real critical one. it's probably the easiest one, but at this point in time, it's a real barrier for many schools. Let me give you an example of the state of Illinois. We have school buildings who actually spend as little as $3,000 per child, and we have schools that actually spend as much as $14,000. There's great inequities in the state, and I think we're not alone. That presents great barriers when we're trying to build an infrastructure where we have equitable, universal access to this for all children. And I believe that that the panelists who were before us were really right, that we need a comprehensive approach to that. We need every school wired and every child having access to this information. So I'd like to end by defining education, if you will, or actually defining learning based on a definition from one of my friends in British Columbia. She calls learning the history of significant moments in a child's life. And I think it is the charge to educators and communities and business and industry to make sure that those significant moments happen in children's lives, and we go forward with that. So thank you very much.
Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to note that Waukegan District resides in Congressman Porter's district, a good friend and a good friend of education. On Friday, March the 10th, 1995, Secretary of Education Richard Riley visited Waukegan to view our K-12 technology program. He had the opportunity to visit with both students and teachers who are using technology integrated into their daily curriculum to enhance learning. At the press conference to assess what he had seen, he stated, and I quote from the Waukegan News-Sun, "What we have seen here today, I think, represents the future of education." I'm going to repeat that. What we have seen here today, I think, represents the future of education. There are many school districts in this country that are doing many good things regarding technology and learning. In the complete written text, which I have submitted for your consideration, I illustrated what I believe would be the classroom of 2015. It's a little vignette, and I hope you had a chance to read it in terms of what 2 teachers in our district would be doing 20 years from now. In Waukegan, which is both an Illinois State Board of Education model demonstration site for technology and a U.S. Department of Education challenge grant district, we believe that integrating technology into the curriculum and the classroom to reform schools can be done and is being done in classrooms across America. Our Classrooms Without Desks and Classrooms Without Walls program has provided teachers and students in Waukegan the tools to move to a higher plane of learning. Past innovations from the pencil to the VCR are and have been hailed as the next panacea for education. But these new tools in the hands of teachers continued to keep students in the role of passive learner and the teacher in the role of primary provider of the learning. The use of computers and other forms of communication technology can have a significant impact on a classroom environment if used properly. Now, Waukegan is a district of approximately 13,000 students. We are 70% minority. We're approximately 50% Hispanic. Our school, our community is a wonderful community. It's a working class community. We are on about the national average in terms of expenditures per pupil. We are not a rich district. You know, people say, well, you're along the North Shore. Well, we do not share in some of that wealth. Our expenditure per pupil is about $5,400. And we have neighbors who spend that $14,000 that Cheryl was alluding to. It is a school district that's very concerned about its students. That is illustrated by our challenge grant. We leveraged, with the money we got from our challenge grant, an additional $6.1 million from our 16 partners to provide services, technical assistance, and dollars over the next 5 years to more than to double the amount of money that we got from the challenge grant. That incentive from the challenge grant energized our community, and it has put us in a position where we can take this technology to more and more students in our school system. I'll talk a little bit later about what some of the results have been on our pilots, but Well, this is probably a good a time as any to mention it. The pilot classrooms we've had where I've illustrated here, we have seen an increase in our test scores in these kids, where they have had the opportunity to use the technology in the manner that has been described by all the panels. We have seen some very positive results initially. NCREL, the North Central Regional Educational Laboratory, will be doing an extensive study on Waukegan over the next 5 years as we spend this money. But I'm confident that we're on the right track in terms of what we're doing in the classroom. I see three major factors that will bring about this significant paradigm shift, and it's really important that we focus on these things. And a little later I'll have some recommendations as to how I think we can get there. First is the technology itself, that it is interactive and two-way, that it is generative and creative and prescriptive for kids. What does this mean? Well, it means that the student use is not limited to just learning in the classroom, that the student will be able to use multiple sources of information, that the technology will be assistive in helping the student create multimedia presentations in the classroom and enabling students and teachers to become active, engaged learners. Next is the school structure. And I know this is something that's hotly debated, is what is going to be the school structure and what are we going to do to change? I really believe that the classroom will be more collaborative than it is now. You know, we talk about homeschooling and we talk about, you know, kids being out on their own learning, but believe me, the teacher role will be even greater in this collaborative because the technology will pull them together. They may not always be physically in the same place, but they will be working together in a collaborative venture to learn together. Well, I'm not going to comment on the first panel because I've cooled off somewhat since then, so I'm going to move on. But it will feature expanded educational resource markets, that there will be a greater emphasis on family learning and greater student mobility for learning. Laptops, for instance, which will be one of our next phases, where our students will receive laptops to take home, to take to museums, to take on field trips, to actually have their programs with them to where they can actually start putting their presentations together before they get back to the classroom. In order to accomplish this, I think there will be less grading. Now, I don't mean the kind of grading of A, B, C, D. I mean less grading. I see more age grouping. I think that will happen so that kids can learn from each other. Older kids can teach younger kids. I think teachers will appreciate this happening because they won't be able to get around to everyone. I think there'll be less age grouping in the future. I think that more electronic sources of information available at home and school will connect the two electronically, that you'll see more communication between families and homes and the school electronically, maybe even the transfer of homework, electronic hotlines, grades being transferred electronically, and so on. The third factor is what will be the role of educators in this? The pervasive style of teaching will be learning by doing. I'm convinced that we will see that happening as we are in Waukegan now, where the process is emphasized more than content. And I want to say that again for effect, where the process is emphasized more than content, where the first panel did talk about the fact that how we learn and how we can research and how we can continue to use data and manage data in the workplace will be more important than some of the things that we would learn in pencil paper activities. Assessment will be more performance-based, with student portfolios maintained on each student by the teacher, both electronic and paper. In addition, the curriculum will be somewhat student-driven. The students want to do a poll to learn math, to learn interactive activities, to be involved in interpersonal communications. They could pick their topic, for instance, as to what they might want to poll people about. What this means is the teacher also will team with multi-age students to participate in collaborative problem-based learning projects which promote more of a Socraterian model of instruction. Assessments will be product-oriented, and students will be able, to some degree, to guide their own learning. Now, what I'd like to talk about now are how I think your next logical question is, well, how are we going to get to this in public schools, particularly a district like Waukegan, which I think represents more districts than the two-tiered system, two-tiered caste system that some of the people in the first panel advocated, where everyone can be homeschooled by loving parents. I can tell you, I have a homeless coordinator. I have a homeless coordinator that makes sure that the kids that go home to live in cars and shelters have books, have clothes, and have food. They're not worried about whether they're going to be able to go home and get on the internet and work with their parents and answer any questions about how was school today. They're worried about where their next meal is coming from. The first thing I would recommend is that we create a National Technical Advisory Council, NTAC if you will, to recommend objectives for districts and educators to follow. This council would develop technology guidelines, implementation procedures, and instructional strategies in conjunction with CEDAR, the Department of Education, businesses, universities, state boards of education, and local school districts. NTAC, or this National Advisory Council, would not determine what schools teach, such as the content, but would provide an effective tool for instruction. What Cheryl alluded to, small rural districts, where I had an opportunity to keynote 5 counties in southern Illinois last week, they're just getting started. They don't have the resources, the manpower to get the technical assistance they need to put this kind of program together that we may have in Waukegan. So it's important that they be provided with these opportunities and at the same time the guidance that they need. And again, I want to say we're not looking for another mandate. We're just looking for guidance and incentives. And that's number 2, that the role of the federal government would be to stimulate implementation by funding a collaborative effort of federal, state, and local school districts along with businesses. I would propose that of the 44 million students, that the federal government at least put at least $10 a student behind each student, which would be matched. This would be a match by the states and local school districts, thereby putting $30 behind each student for technology. We have 13,000 students, so that would be approximately $500,000 that we would have available from those sources. And I want to go back to our challenge grant. Our community will more than match anything you put into this. I guarantee that any community that has the opportunity to say, if you give us $1, we'll match it with $1 and we'll find $1 from another source. I don't think there's any question that you can bring a community together to do that if you provide that kind of incentive. Third, provide pilot programs. Pilot model demonstration sites, such as Waukegan, in each state of the union to act as laboratories and observation sites for school districts desiring to implement an effective technology program. We're all over the place, and industry certainly would like to sell us all kinds of things. I'm talking about the communications industry. There's all kinds of remedies out there that they would love to sell us. You could, in some cases, refer to them as snake oil. I have had people come to me in my office and say, if you buy this $1 million package, we guarantee we'll raise your test scores, but you got to throw out your entire curriculum and do what we do. And there are some school districts who will fall for that. And it's important that school districts maintain their curricular integrity, but at the same time have the guidance and have the opportunity to see what's working in the world. And this research is really important. Our North Central Lab has been a great assistance to us. We wouldn't be where we are today if it weren't for NCREL. And number 4 would be to monitor. I don't expect you to do these things for us, get us moving, and then just abandon us or not continue to try to understand where we're going in this country. I would recommend that you monitor implementation annually through the National Advisory Council and report back to you annually to this committee or to Congress. NTAC would report progress on both the recommended qualitative and quantitative aspects of the program and recommend needed course corrections and possible future funding needs. A national inventory could be conducted that would indicate the current status of technology in the classroom and where it is headed as the years go by. I am confident that much like our goal in the 1960s to go to the moon, if we come together to implement this program in a united effort on behalf of our students, we can and will be successful in reforming education in the United States. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you.
I would apologize to this panel. I've always indicated to my group this year that we probably should have one panel because we all get a dozen other commitments that we have. And secondly, I had hoped also that some of you folks might have been on that first panel because
believe me, so do we.
To bring the real world that you're faced with into the hearing. That's why I kept mentioning on several occasions during the first panel, what about the dysfunctional families? And didn't get any response. But nevertheless, I'll turn to Mr. Faywell at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with your comments, and they were esteemed and members of academia, but they were perhaps a wee bit up there in the ivory tower. I'm very interested in your comments, Dr. Brown, that has indicated that the local communities are not, and the school districts aren't just sitting there not doing anything. And one question I would put to you, supposing we in Congress did nothing, in your opinion, what would be the implementation of the technological revolution, let's say in Illinois, and Ms. Lemke, you can chime in here, and also Dr. McGriff.
Well, I think you'll see a shotgun effect.
The local people are not unaware of this. School districts are not unaware of this. And if there's anything that should excite people in education, it is the potential of the technological revolution. And oftentimes, I find the people are way ahead of Congress, that we're usually there with our finger up in the air and saying, oh, I think, the wind is blowing from this direction now. And that comes from the fact that people are doing things.
I agree. I think we would get a scattergun effect to the improvements that you're seeing. You won't see that concerted effort. Now, Illinois, I think, is moving in the right direction, much because of Cheryl's efforts. We're so fortunate to have Cheryl in Illinois. But again, we don't have the unified goals that we need to move us all in the same direction. I think in the three panels there was, I think, a consensus that we need to move forward in terms of engaged learning using high-tech equipment. And again, using just high-tech equipment to do Math Blaster, which is a rote math game, is the same as giving a kid a worksheet and making him stay in from PE. That's a misuse of the technology. So we need to move people to that plane, and unless we have, I think, some standards that people can follow to implement this technology, and certainly industry can help there, that's why I think there needs to be a concerted effort to bring people together in terms of what is the most effective use. And there is some real good research out there that if it's used properly, we can raise test scores. I'm convinced that we can.
And I happen to believe that there is a role for the federal government to play, don't misunderstand. Yes. Let me ask this question, Ms. Lemke, then what is the State Board of Education indeed doing to excite and give incentives in the legislature to the Illinois communities? Of course, I'm from Illinois, and I think much of the state, and I know people are out there doing things. I always cringe a bit, I just add this, when I hear the criticisms of public education today as though it is just an abysmal, abject failure. And I happen to have raised 3 children. They went to the public schools. I think they got a fairly adequate education, I believe. A very fine education. I know they're not perfect, but I do appreciate every once in a while some stalwarts saying, well, just a minute, good, solid criticism we need, but just don't kick us around like an old dog all the time. We're not dead, and we're aware. So what is the State Board of Education doing in the state legislature to bring incentive to the local communities to recognize the potential here?
Well, we're certainly making a good beginning on that. The state legislature has allocated some dollars during the upcoming school year, and we're doing 3 major things. One is we are actually establishing a state infrastructure that will allow school districts to connect to internet at a more affordable rates. Frankly, one of the things that we're running into in the state of Illinois is we have 18 LADAs. I think we top every state in the nation in terms of how many LADAs we have, which means it's very expensive to go from one part to call from one part of the state to the next, and so the state is helping to equalize that access. Oh, the LADA is a yes. A LADA is when Ma Bell broke up. They created these boundaries where you can't call from one LATA to the next LATA without going through a third long-distance carrier and then also going through another carrier at the end. In essence, it's more expensive, and 18 is a lot of LATAs to have. The second area that we're investing some dollars is capacity building for our local school districts. Frankly, we do really believe that dollars follow vision, and school districts cannot capitalize on that unless they understand. So we're creating 6 hubs across the state that will be professional development hubs, providing professional development in the areas of technology. We're actually doing a lot of system design and allowing school districts to get unbiased networking consultation through those hubs. Information exchange. Frankly, I think that if we just exchanged information about what one district is doing to another, instead of all building from the grassroots, we can build off each other's shoulders, and we're trying to do that approach as well. The third area is we are granting significant dollars out to school districts in the area of connectivity, but we are requiring that they participate in learning projects across networks, and if they're interested in the learning piece and interested in participating in that, we will provide the connectivity so they have full bandwidth access to the internet. And we're also doing some systemic change. May I also add, I think there is a role, for your previous question, I think there is a role for the federal government. One is the research and development, and I think we have not done a significant job in that arena. Another one is the whole issue of equity across the nation, and it's at the federal level, for example, where the regulatory issues are being discussed. And I think you have a very significant role, for example, with the universal service access. Another one, and I'm not sure that you're aware of the impact that you have had through the Office of Technology Assessment that is no longer there, unfortunately, with the products that they have put out. When there's a national study that comes out, everybody in the nation, from a community perspective, uses that research for leverage and moving in particular directions. And I think that's something that we should applaud Congress for having done for many years, and we are frankly very sorry that that's gone away. The last one is, I think we need to understand some of the drivers that are happening for what the school system is today. Frankly, one of them is college entrance examinations. I mean, if they drive what we're doing in our high schools. When you ask an elementary school teacher what they teach, they say, I teach children. And when you ask a high school teacher what they teach, oftentimes they say, I teach academics. And one of the reasons is that college entrance exam. So if we can change that approach so that we can do some of the things that Seymour Papert and Alan Kay talked about this morning, it's very difficult to do within that context that we have. And I think you can help us with that as well.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond to the
Yes,
previous
certainly.
question? The Edison Project takes a slightly different approach. One, we've set as our mission to be able to create an educational design that can function in every school district that currently spends at or near the national average. So we could work in Dr. Brown's school district. What we provide to any district who spends at or near the national average is a laptop for every teacher, a computer in the home of every child, 4 weeks of training before school opens, 2 hours of training every single day, and we devote 4% of our budget to research and development. What we need from the federal government is that equity issue again, because the large number of the school districts could never have Edison Partnership schools, even though their communities may want them, unless they spend at or near the national average.
Mm-hmm. You know, I might add that perhaps every member of Congress ought to have a computer in their home, too. I came to Congress as a practicing attorney, computer illiterate. I'm not what I would call advanced, but I did put a modem into my home. I can sit down in my little office in my home and have contact with everything that's on the computer in the office, and everything that we can do in Washington, I can do at my home. I have my fax machine, I have the photostat machine, I have a direct telephone contact. And when we are not in session or in committee, I can do everything from my home. So in a sense, I am communicating, and I think that this is something that we in Congress ought to really insist upon, because it's only when you begin to see the tremendous potential that is out there that you can gain access, if it's nothing more than just your files, to be able to pick up your complete file and be able to work on it at home just as if you were in Washington is a tremendous asset. So that at least gives me some comprehension of the potential that is out there as technology is finally implemented in our public school systems throughout this land of ours. Thank you very much.
Mr. Early?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few comments, and not really a question. I agree with Chairman Goodling that it would have been good if you had been on the first panel, although we'd probably still be here with hammer and tongs going at it. I appreciate your optimism about the current educational system. Ms. Lemke, you commented about you don't need to change the system, you just have to work within it and improve it. I do have some sympathy with what the first panel was saying, however, based on my personal experience. And let me tell you, first of all, I was homeschooled, not by choice, but because I was ill. And it's a constant surprise to people to find that out, since I ended up with a PhD in nuclear physics and ended up in Congress. Unbeknownst to me, I became a hero to the homeschool movement, even though I would rather have gone to school. It also, of course, left me a total social nerd, which my colleagues fully can appreciate. But at any event, as I said, I taught for 22 years at the college level, but I specialized or tried to educate students about how to teach science. And so I ended up in a lot of elementary and secondary classrooms. I really don't share all of your optimism about the present system and what we can do with it. I wish I had some better answers. I'm not sure the first panel's answers were that much better than yours, and maybe worse. But I was struck so often by going into the schools at the tremendous variation from school to school, even from classroom to classroom. And I will never forget going into one school where there were 2 classrooms, same grade level, 2 different teachers, same curriculum, and in one the students were alert, active, learning, and the other one they were dead, stultified, and not learning. I'm not saying that all the problems are due to teachers. There are many social factors as well. But I really do think we have to have some new and innovative thinking about how the schools can operate, and particularly how the technology can help in the renovation and rejuvenation of the ideas that we're trying to get across in education. I think some of the reactions we hear from the educational community, and I don't accuse you of this because obviously you're at the forefront of these things or you wouldn't be here today, but a lot of it is stultified thinking and saying, or even defensive, saying, the system's really not that bad and we're doing a good job. And that's not going to cut it in the next 20 years. We're facing some very major challenges within the nation and from without the nation. And I just wanted to ramble on a bit and express my reservations to your comments, but also say how much I appreciate your coming here and sharing your ideas. It was certainly a good counterbalance to what we had in the first panel. And so thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to say that Edison doesn't believe that we don't need to make substantial change in the existing system. We simply believe that we can partner with existing school districts. We can do it within the context of public education. But our design calls for changes in 10 major areas of how schools operate, and technology is only one of the 10. And what we've done is to look at the very best schools, whether they are public or private, around the world, and selected 10 elements that good schools implement. And they've been found to have a profound impact, even on those youngsters who come from fractured homes, because until public schools are able to separate this connection between having a wonderful family and middle class status with being educated, we will never be prepared for the 21st century.
And may I concur? I do not mean to imply that we do not need to improve the system, but I believe that we can do it from within the system with your help. And I believe in communities. I think if we can open up the school so it becomes a community learning center and we can take away the isolation of the classroom, we have a synergy that will really will improve the system.
And there's a pragmatic reason for you to provide these incentives. There isn't a union contract that is in effect today that would not require us to negotiate the changes that the two gentlemen here insisted have to happen. It's working conditions. It's a situation that we deal with. We have a wonderful union in our district, and they're very progressive. But at the same time, if I went back to them and said the things that were said by these two gentlemen from MIT, we would have a great deal of discussion about whether we could implement what they had talked about, and it would also cost me a great deal of money.
If Mr. Chairman, if I may just respond to that, that's one of the most discouraging things I found in my experience in the elementary schools, dealing with the union rules, some of the requirements there, and particularly when I was teaching in service, and at 4 o'clock, excuse me, even though I had 3 minutes to go to finish the demonstration experiment, a good number would get up and walk out because the contract only required them to stay until 4 o'clock for in-service. That's very discouraging.
Well, I want to say that our union has done an excellent job in working with us, and they've been very good about that. But I can tell you that there are some school districts where it would be very difficult to implement these kinds of changes we've been talking about, particularly in the first panel, without extensive negotiations.
Well, I have to have on the record that the Edison Project partners with 2 innovative unions, one in Wichita, Kansas, and a union in Mount Clemens, Michigan. And in both cases, they agreed to every single change that needed to be made, from the longer school day to the longer school year and a career ladder. We will not enter a community unless the union is open and receptive to all of the innovations in the design.
Well, of course, there's no substitute for a good teacher. In the one-room experience I had in the first 4 grades in the little school, Miss Yost was outstanding, and so was the education. I can't say the same for grades 5 through 8 in the big school. And again, it all had to do with the teacher in the classroom. And second thing it has to do with is the teacher allowed to be creative and innovative. It depends on the leadership in the school and the leadership at the top. I'm glad you just touched on the last thing that you did touch on, because I've been telling my governor that he can talk about reform all he wants in my great state, but until they deal with Act 195, he's probably not going to accomplish all these wonderful things he's talking about. And I also was going to point out, I was saying all these things for Mr. Eller's benefit, but he's not here. I also was going to point out that usually it's the people in the district who hold back change. Every place I go, the neighboring school district is just a terrible school district. But their school district is outstanding. And it doesn't matter where you go. I mean, their school district is outstanding. It's the neighborhood, the neighbor school district that's just pathetic. And oftentimes, you know, you can't change very much if you don't have them moving. A couple questions. Dr. McGriff, you said there are 2 hours of prep every day, which made me perk up and want to know how many hours in the classroom.
Our primary youngsters have a 7-hour school day, and our elementary through grade 12 youngsters have a 12-hour day. Teachers are able to get the 2 hours of planning time, or I should say 2 periods, because in some districts a period is 50 minutes and another district is 45, because we provide music, foreign language, art, and physical education taught by a specialist to all children starting in kindergarten. And that's where the kids are when their classroom teachers are engaged in planning.
So that classroom teacher, 2 hours plus, what might that classroom teacher have in the actual classroom?
The rest of the day is spent with youngsters teaching various academic subject areas, because they work an 8-hour or a 7-hour day.
Okay, that's, I mean, the 12 hours is that you talk about is not, they are not responsible to be there 12 hours or anything of that nature.
No, we also provide, because we know that some youngsters, there are several other features for at-risk kids that we provide in our program. We know that some parents are working 2 jobs and kids need before and after school care, so we have a before and after school program in addition to the 7-hour day and 8-hour day. The research is very clear that high-risk youngsters forget a lot over the summer because their parents can't engage them in learning activities, so we have a 206-day school year for children. And all of these things help to compensate for the fact that they have difficult home environments.
Well, I always mentioned the $40 billion for Chapter 1 was supposed to have been over and above what every other child got. It was supposed to be before school, after school, Saturdays, summers. Unfortunately, in many instances, that isn't what happened. And, the second point you made, something about the average per pupil expenditure in the country, and then I was thinking, you know, I have partial responsibility to honor the Speaker by doing something to make sure that D.C. schools are the model for the country. Their pupil expenditure at the present time, I believe, is one of the highest in the country.
That's correct.
And so they're way above that average that you talked about.
When we developed our model, the average for the country was 5.5. We can still work with districts who spend slightly below 5.5. And there are a number of districts that spend substantially more than the 5.5 that our model will support. So basically, our model is a way of saying, how do you be more efficient with the money that's currently being spent in the average school district and at the same time be able to provide world-class education for all kids?
I'm usually a very good first meeting. How do I want to say that? I usually know the individual when I meet them on the first occasion, and I was just wondering where Ms. Lemke was when my new governor was searching all over the country for a superintendent of public instruction. You must have been hiding somewhere.
I've been in Washington State for the last 10 years.
Long way away. Couldn't see you for the apple trees. I appreciated, Dr. Brown, your comment, honor the pioneers. I think you were the one of you talked about honoring the pioneers because, again, I've been trying to get people in my state to please go out across the state and see the wonderful things that are happening, but rather than do that, they just constantly badmouth public education and will not go out and see all the wonderful. I just spent Friday down in Center City, Philadelphia. I saw some wonderful things happening in Center City, Philadelphia. I wish I could get some of the leadership in the state to do the same. I think they would really be surprised. And I got the message that challenge grants and Office of Resource and Technology are very important to those of you who are out in the public sector. You got that message, Mr. Faywa?
Did hear it.
Okay, very good. Again, I apologize. You know, as I said earlier today, my fear was that by the time we got to panel 2 and panel 3, everybody would be tied up. The chairman of this committee in this room, they have a TV set here, and I'm looking down and seeing him most of the time because he has legislation on the floor, as well as several other members of both committees are down there offering amendments, and you don't have that privilege to see that TV set. I don't either in my in my conference room. Again, we thank you very, very much. Any other questions or comments? Staff, you have anything that you want to know that they haven't said? Very well. We thank you very much. The next time we'll have you back, and we'll have you on with the first panel, interspersed between each one of them.
Nice to meet you, Mr.
Wednesday night, House Education Subcommittee.
Hey, Doug. I don't recall getting.
A couple of House Education subcommittees are planning hearings in the near future. Next Wednesday, the Early Childhood and Family Subcommittee scheduled a hearing on English as the common language. And Monday, October 23rd, the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee has tentatively planned a hearing in Milwaukee on school choice. This week on America and the Courts, we examine the case Romer versus Evans, argued this week before the Supreme Court. The case tests a Colorado constitutional amendment